Well, hello, and thank you for being here at the last presentation of the day. Hope your day has been good and you've been learning what you came here for. My name is Gustavo Rene Antunes. Everybody knows me as Rene, and if you see me walking by, feel free to call me by my name. We are going to be talking about RMAN, and I won't say 19.3. I put 19.3 because it's the latest, but for 19.3, there's very little features that were added. But what is new and what is old with RMAN? I come from a company called Pythian. This is a Canada-based company, and we are about 400, a little bit more IT people across the world in currently 37 countries. So we do all of these technologies. So we're a service company, and my main focus is databases, but a lot of my teammates focus in infrastructure, DevOps, and right now, obviously, cloud. So this is a lot of what we do and where we come from. Thank you for being here, and hopefully by the end of the presentation, everybody's going to be happy and clapping and enjoying the rest of the conference. So thank you very much for being here. Where do I come from? I used to have this slide where I put a lot of the things that I've done, and I don't want to be too wide about this. So what I do is, and I prefer to, is go to my webpage, reneace.com. I blog there. I tweet. This is my Twitter handle. And right now I'm tweeting with DVTS 2019. So you'll find a lot of what I do in these three places. So let's get started. Back in 2012, and this hasn't changed that much, IOUG, the Independent Oracle User Group, did a survey on database availability. And a lot of the data that's being said and mentioned here is still valid today. What my attention goes to is that 18% have no disaster recovery. And we are talking about medium-sized to higher-end businesses. So what this is telling me is that in combination with this 37% that do some type of disaster recovery, you're really, really in a situation where you can lose your job. And an enterprise can lose their data or be out of business for a very long time. An example of this, and just before coming over here to Tokyo, a company was out for 2 weeks just because they hadn't tested their disaster recovery scenarios. They thought they had a good backup. It wasn't good. They thought they had a good snapshot. It wasn't good. And so it took them almost 14 days to get back up. Now, when we're talking about money-wise and the impact of the business, well, you can imagine that it is a very high impact that this had for them, right? Now, we know that Oracle has different types of technology so that you can manage your recovery scenarios, right? We're talking about DataGuard, flashback technologies, secure backup, but we're mainly going to be focused on Recovery Manager, on RMAN. Now, we know that RMAN, it's not as fast as flashback, because sometimes it could take just a couple of seconds to do a flashback versus doing a full recovery with RMAN. But now, a little bit of the history of RMAN, you can see it here. We started with a duplicate, a backup set back in Oracle 8, and currently we're at duplicating pluggable databases on 19C, right? Which was released in February of this year. Now, one of the things that has changed between 12 and 19 is exactly the duplicate pluggable database. That it was something that you couldn't do at the beginning when it was released. But I've heard that new and very cool things are coming for 20 as well. So as you can see, RMAN has grown to be a very robust product, and it is something that everybody should be familiar with on using. Now, I know that most of you should know what a pluggable database is, but for those of you who don't, the technology is divided into a container database and a pluggable database. A container database, it includes 0 or up to 256 pluggable databases. And a pluggable database is your user-contained data and code for your specific applications. As you might have heard in Oracle Open World, before Oracle Open World last week, the licensing option was only available to have one pluggable database in your container database. As of now, you can have up to 3 pluggable databases within a container database. So hopefully you'll start using it, because as of 20C, Oracle will no longer support non-pluggable databases. Now, when I say a pluggable database is a logical, it's because in the physical world, it's still data files, control files, and online redo logs, right? So if you see it, it's more of a logical way that it is represented. So we're talking about the CDB, which is the container. It points to the root, and the pluggable databases. Now, for this, it must always exist a seed pluggable database, and the rest are the data that you currently have. Now, what is RMAN? What is Recovery Manager? So Oracle uses a utility called Recovery Manager, or RMAN, and it's basically 2 things. One, it's an executable, which you will find it in the Oracle Home bin directory. And from there, you have a library file called a recover.bsq. Now, the recover.bsq is the one that holds basically all of the procedures that the executable is going to call. Now, the way that it is called is through a channel, and it creates a server session in the database. And from there, it writes to the disk or to the media management layer, which this can be a cloud backup service, or it can be a tape service as well. Now, what is it that you need to back up? the critical part, it's data files, control files, and archive redo logs. And if we're talking about inconsistent backups or hot backups, the root database needs to also be backed up consistently because all of the changes are written there. So it's something to always think about. Now, the rest of the files, these are not backup through RMAN, but it is always good to have a good backup strategy for this. Now, how does RMAN work? RMAN works in 3 phases. One is called the read phase, which basically it reads the data files. It puts the written blocks into input, read, and output buffers. These are sized of 4 megabyte blocks each. And after that, it goes to the copy phase, which is basically the channel. And this is where RMAN is different from all of the other technologies, because this is where the validation, the compression, and the encryption works. And from there, it gets put into output buffers. These are, as you can see, are much, much smaller than this one's right here. And then it goes to the write phase, and it writes the backup piece. Now, this is the way that a backup works. If we were talking about restoring, it's the other way around. The backup piece gets put into the output buffers, and then it goes through the validation, compression, and encryption. And then it gets written to the data file. Now, what is it that we need to consider when we're thinking about taking backups with RMAN? Are we going to use a catalog or no catalog database? If we decide to use a catalog database, then it's another database that we have to maintain, and we have to treat as a production database. If the database, we're going to be putting it in archive log or no archive log. So if it's going to be a consistent backup or an inconsistent backup. We also need to think about the parameter control file record keep time, because we need to set it to a time or a number of days where the information is going to be kept within the control file. Now, we want to make sure that this is at least 1 day higher than our service level agreement, because all of the records in the control file are cyclical. So if it gets written out, you might lose a backup if it's not according to your service level agreement. Now, a good thing to have and to set are the NLS parameters, so that you have more information in your backup logs. So make sure to always set it to at least have the hour, minute, and seconds, because up until 19, we're still talking about an LS date format of date, month, and year. So make sure to set your NLS parameters correctly. Now, the other thing that we also want to consider is, that it gets written somewhere, it's the database ID so that we don't lose it. So make sure to include any of these formats that you have right here so that the database ID always gets written to the backup piece as well. In most of my cases, unless specified that we don't, I always turn on the auto backup for the control file. And always configure your archive log deletion policy. And especially if you're using DataGuard as well, this is something to always think about. Don't forget to set up your backup deletion for your archive logs. Now, Oracle introduced the Oracle Backup Service. And one of the ways to use it if we're still on-premise is through an Oracle Backup module. Now, this backup service, we can still back up databases from version 10.2, and it includes also standard edition. Now, we can use any of these operating systems, but one of the things that we have to be very thoughtful is that encryption is mandatory. So as you heard from Ricardo, if you attended any of his sessions before, Oracle in the cloud is encrypting everything, right? And so if we're sending our backup that is on-premise, it also has to be mandatory. One of the things is that it does require the advanced security option if you're using the secure backup SBT. But if you're not using this secure backup, it doesn't require. So you will only set up the wallet so that it can encrypt it, but you're not infringing in any licensing penalties if you're using it. Now, there are two billing models, and it's metered and non-metered. And what are the things, obviously, that you need to consider if you're going to be using this from premise to the cloud? It's the backup size and how much you can compress the data, because all of this will be going through your public network. So your internet upload bandwidth is a very, very important thing to know. Now, how is it that you set up this? You download from OTN what is called the Oracle Database Backup Module. And the installation is very simple. You need to have a service name, an identity domain, the username for your Oracle public cloud, and the password as well. And this, you're going to put it in a location where a secure wallet is going to be created. Now, as you can see, this command right here, it took me about 5 to 10 minutes to set everything up. So I run a Java command that is called Oracle Public Cloud Install. I pass it the service name, the identity domain, my public cloud ID, the password. As I was mentioning, this is the location where the wallet is going to go. And it will install a library. And this is the location where I will be installing the library. Once I run that, it creates these three files right here. The library file, which is called live OPC. The other one is a configuration file, which will include the information of my ID, my Oracle database account, my Oracle database domain in the public cloud, as you can see here. And at last, it creates a secure wallet with all of the credentials. So this is where it will use, or this is what it will use to encrypt our backups. Once I have set this up, I need to set the encryption on by a password. And when I run my backup command, I just pass it the parameters of this library that was created, the SVT parameters, and the backup command. And as you can see, it is now using the Oracle Database Backup Service. One of the technologies that I've always loved, it's the way to flashback. And the main reason that I love this technology is because when I first started my work as a database administrator, I caused a very big outage in my company. I actually deleted a production table instead of deleting it in the development environment. And this was for a top 10 Fortune 500 company that I did this. So I don't know how I kept my job, but if I would have had back then flashback technologies, my job would have been a lot easier back then. So this is something that I really recommend that you start. If you're not using it, get to know it. Now, what you do need to know is that you can use the share or the local undo. The container database has to be in archive log mode, and the FRA, the fast recovery area, needs to be enabled. So try it out if you haven't tried it out. Now, sadly, Oracle didn't include a lot of new features in 19C. The biggest feature that it included is the recovery catalog support for pluggable databases. So now you can register and manage your individual pluggable database within the recovery catalog. But besides that, nothing else was included in the 19C version for RMAN. Now, I have about 15 minutes, and I'm going to show you different scenarios of RMAN that are included in 18 and 12 version. So, as you can see here, one of the things that was included in 18, it's what it's called the pre-plugin backups. Now, what does this mean? It means that you can take a backup or previous unplug and plug to the new container database, and you can use that backup in a point in time where you haven't taken a backup in the new container database. And I'll show an example of this. So here, as you can see, we created a user and a table within this user, which is right here. Now, what I did is we created a pre-plugin backup, right? And this is in container database 1. And we say backup pluggable database plus archive log, and this is a normal backup, right? Now, after that, what I want to do is I want to unplug this database. So I close it. I unplug it to this XML, and then I drop this pluggable database, and I'm keeping the data files. Now, after that, I'm checking the new compatibility in the new container database. In here, it's telling me that yes, it is compatible. So I create the pluggable database with this XML. I'm converting the file names, as you can see here, and the pluggable database was open. But in that meantime, I haven't taken a new backup in the new container database where I plugged in this pluggable database. So what I did is I emulated a loss of a data file. So right here, after, so I closed it, and I dropped or removed a data file, and then I tried to open it. And as you can see here, it's not allowing me to open this pluggable databases. But because I took a backup previous to this exercise of plugging and unplugging, what I can do now, and this is a command that was included in 18, it's set pre-plugin container as this. And now I can see the backups of that pluggable database. So basically what it's doing, it's adding the metadata to the control file of that backup that I took from the other container database. And as you can see here, it is listing me this backup. I can see as well the archive logs, right? So what I'm going to be doing is now restoring that pluggable database, but I have to tell it that it's from a pre-plugin. And right here, it's starting to restore all of that. Now, I'm going to be recovering that pluggable database from that pre-plugin. But during my switch, I needed an archive log. So any archive logs that were generated during that switch, I need to catalog them. So in here, I'm missing an archive log. And I'm telling it catalog pre-plugin archive log as this. It is cataloging this archive log. And now I'm recovering again the pluggable database. Once it finishes, I need to restore the pluggable database with the skip option, so that basically this is to set the new names after the restore is done. And as you can see here, because it's telling me it's already plugged in or it's already restored. So that is why I need to do that. I finish the recovery of this pluggable database. And then now I'm able to open it. So as you can see, this is a very cool feature when we're plugging in and when we're unplugging from one container and plugging into a new container database. And that was something of a very gray area that we couldn't fix in the past. And now we can avoid that type of data loss scenario. So that's one very cool feature that was added in 18C. Now, because I want to leave time for any questions, what I'm going to be doing now is I'm taking a backup of my database, right? So right now I'm doing a backup database plus archive log. And in here, I'm going to emulate a loss of a data file. And sorry. I'm going to, as you can see here, I'm deleting all of these data files. And I'm going to be doing a recover of the pluggable database, right? So in here, I restore pluggable database 1. And it is allowing me to do that. Then I recover the pluggable database. And everything is working correctly, right? Now, one of the things that we have to take always in mind is that when you drop a pluggable database, all of the information of that pluggable database is also removed from the control file. So this is very important for you to know, right? Because if I drop a pluggable database, and even though I have a backup of it, and I try to restore this pluggable database, it's going to fail, as you can see right here, right? And even I try to list the backup tag, but it is present there, but it is not allowing me on why to recover that pluggable database. So what I did was investigate that why we got this error. Now, this is a command that if you're using RMAN, I really recommend that you use, which is aura debug and Control F with a level 4. Now, this is going to give you a lot of the information of how the pluggable database records exist. You'll find this information in that dump file. And if we go down here, we can see that pluggable database with a record equals 4, and it's called test database. And one is a record equals 4, and the other one is an ID. They're not the same, so it's always good to know the difference between one and the other. Get to know the data file section as well, right? So in here, the pluggable database ID is related to this ID. So that is how the data files between one is going to be related to the pluggable database. Now, if I drop the pluggable database and I do another dump of my control file, I will go back and see now that the record still exists, but the ID changed to 0. So even though the name and the record is still there, the ID got deleted. And that's how Oracle knows that this pluggable database no longer exists for it. So it's very important to know, because here it is telling me that data file 12 is related to ID 4. But as you can see here, we no longer have an ID 4. So that relationship is now broken, and you cannot recover after you drop a pluggable database. So it's very, very important that when you set up your backups, you align it as well for every drop of your pluggable databases that you're going to be doing. I'm going to go back to here, and because I only have 4 minutes, I'm going to be doing a recap of what we talked about. So make sure to always have your database ID in a secure location. I cannot state and I cannot say how important that is to know. I've seen databases, production databases get lost because they didn't know the database ID in a very critical situation. RMAN recovery of a table is now possible since version 12, and it has only improved and gotten more stable in the later technologies. Always the restore, previous summary, advice failure, RMAN includes all of this scenarios, so that please start and get to know them. Get to know your Control F debug and RMAN traces. It will help you a lot in a very critical situation. And using the Oracle Public Cloud is as easy as using any media management layer going forward. I do want to thank you for staying after or so close to 7. And if you do have any questions, please let me know.